Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today I just wanted to share some of my thoughts on a subject that I believe to be misunderstood within Christianity. So I believe that as Christians, the Bible and the Bible alone should be our creed, right? So it should be what governs our life. It should be the reason we believe the things that we do. And what I've found is that more often than not, that isn't the case. Tradition and the opinions of men tend to have a greater influence on the things that we hold as true. And I think that if we are honest with ourselves, we would have to admit that a lot of the positions that we hold, we can't actually find a biblical reason for them. And so I think it's time that we re-examine some of these positions and hold on to only those that are biblically supported. So in light of this, today I wanted to look at the fourth commandment. I find it very interesting because the one commandment we are told to remember has become the one commandment that the Christian world at large has forgotten. And so this is what I would like to speak to. My hope is to challenge you a bit, to inspire thought, to establish what I believe to be the biblical position on the subject, and then look at some of the different thoughts and arguments that have been presented or surrounded this subject throughout the years. And so we find the fourth commandment in the book of Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 to 11. In verse 8, we are told to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. In verse 9, we are told to abstain from labor. And in verse 10, the seventh day is identified very clearly as the Sabbath of the Lord. And so we see he takes ownership of this day. But what I would like to point out at this time is the use of the word remember. The use of the word remember implies previous knowledge of the subject in question. So it suggests that this is not the first time it has been mentioned, but that instead the Israelites were being asked to recall something that was previously established. And so if we turn to the book of Genesis, we will see the first time the Sabbath was introduced in the Bible. And so in Genesis chapter 2, verse 1 to verse 3, we have the climax of creation. In verse 2, we read that on the seventh day, God ended his work which he made. And in verse 3, we see that he blesses the seventh day and he sanctifies it, the Bible says. It's important to point out here that only one day was blessed and sanctified. And to be sanctified means to be set aside for a holy purpose. So the seventh day was set aside or set apart by God himself for a holy purpose. So that means to say that all days are the same or equal in God's estimation would be inaccurate. A specific day was blessed for a specific reason, and the reason we were given in verse 3 was that God rested after his work of creation, so he bids us to do likewise. And so the Sabbath then serves as a memorial to creation, a weekly acknowledgement of the God of creation. We rest because he rested after creating the earth in 6 literal days. And he thought this day of rest to be necessary for mankind. Right? We read in Mark chapter 2 that the Sabbath was made for man. Right? And so the Sabbath of the fourth commandment was instituted in Eden, as we have seen. After God made the world and created man upon the earth, he made the Sabbath for man. He made the Sabbath for man's benefit. And so the idea of the seventh-day Sabbath being a Jewish custom or Jewish institution isn't a biblical idea. As we've seen, its origin was found in Eden, long before there was a Jew. It was given to mankind, and as the book of Mark states, it was made for man. We even see in Exodus chapter 16 that the Hebrews already kept the Sabbath, thus showing that the institution pre-existed the proclamation at Mount Sinai. So we read these verses here in verse 29 and in verse 30, we see that the people already rested on the seventh day. And this was before the proclamation in chapter 20. And so this is another witness to the fact that the Sabbath existed prior to the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. So it's very curious, its attachment to the Jewish nation and not necessarily the God of creation. And this is true of all the commandments. In verse 28, God mentions his law as being already known, again showing that his law preceded the emergence of the Jewish nation. We read a very interesting text in 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. We are given the definition of sin in the Bible, and it says that whoever committed sin transgressed also the law, for sin is transgression of the law. What this verse shows is that for sin to exist, there must be a law that was broken. And so if Adam sinned, it means that Adam broke or transgressed a law. Again, repeating the fact that God's law predated both Adam and also the Jewish nation. So the law of God, of which the Sabbath forms a part, didn't first come into existence at Mount Sinai, but rather on this occasion it was declared in a very majestic fashion for a people whose ideas of God had become confused in their association with idolaters throughout the Egyptian bondage. So it was therefore necessary in consequence of the darkness that surrounded the worship of God at that time. And so the Hebrews entered into covenant with God. They became his denominated people, and obedience to his commandments distinguished them above or from the other nations. The Sabbath especially became a sign of the God whom they serve. And you could read that in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 20, verse 12, and even verse 20 says the same thing. Exodus chapter 31 repeats these ideas that it is a sign between God and his people. And so you could read throughout the entire of the Old Testament. It is very clear that throughout the Old Testament, the Sabbath was upheld, and it was something that was highly regarded by God as far as his interaction with his people was concerned. Then as we move to the New Testament, it will be also important to note that at no point did anything change. We read in the book of Luke that it was Jesus' practice or custom to attend the synagogues on Sabbath. We read even after the death of Christ, we see that the apostles still kept the Sabbath, and then the new Gentile believers also, when they came into the faith, they also kept the Sabbath. And not just these examples, but we're even told in Isaiah chapter 66, verse 22 and verse 23, that in the earth made new, we will again keep the Sabbath. The Bible says that it shall come to pass from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, say the Lord. So the Bible makes it very clear that in the earth made new throughout eternity, we will be worshiping God from one Sabbath to another Sabbath. So we have in the Old Testament, the Sabbath was upheld. In the New Testament, the Sabbath was upheld. And then in the earth made new, the Sabbath will again be upheld. So in light of all this, the real question is, why doesn't the Christian world at large also uphold or acknowledge the 7-day Sabbath? This is what we want to look at in our next video. We want to look at some of the reasons why the Sabbath has been disregarded.